The one who destroyed Sword God's palace was here. Moreover, Xianxia felt that he'd even met that person. Because the voice he heard was truly too familiar, Xianxia turned around and looked towards the distance. The space there suddenly cracked open, and then a gray-robed old man walked out from within it. Xianxia's pupils constricted at the sight of the old man. It was Jiansu. The old man before him was Jiansu. How could this be possible? Xianxia's eyes were filled with disbelief. Jiansu was the mysterious expert who destroyed Sword God's palace? Meanwhile, Blind Maiden gazed at Jiansu and said, "After hiding for thousands of years, you're finally willing to show yourself?" Jiansu spoke indifferently. "Didn't you seize the stellar sword diagram all those years ago to make me show myself?" Blind Maiden nodded and said, "Both of you are here now, so let's resolve everything today." As soon as she finished speaking, the space around her suddenly started to tremble. "There's something I don't understand." Meanwhile, Jiansu suddenly said, "Blind Maiden, according to my knowledge, there's no connection between you and the Sword God's palace, and there's no relationship between you and Jian Wuji as well. So, why are you taking revenge for the Sword God's palace? I've thought about it throughout these years, but have never figured it out. Could it be that you're really doing this for that insignificant outer court disciple?" As soon as Jiansu finished speaking, Xianxia noticed Blind Maiden's expression instantly turned cold, or it should be called quite ferocious. At the same time, monstrous killing intent appeared out of nowhere. This seemingly solid killing intent was extremely terrifying, and even someone like Xianxia who'd comprehended void rank slaughter intent was almost affected by it. "Looks like it's the truth." Jiansu chuckled and waved his right hand slightly. A translucent circle of light swept out from him, and then the killing intent around him instantly vanished without a trace. After that, he gazed at Blind Maiden and said, "I never expected an expert at your level to actually trap yourself here for so long, just for the sake of an insignificant outer court disciple of Sword God's palace. You really were love-struck." Blind Maiden clenched her fists tightly. "It has been so long. It's time you have your release, and I should have mine as well. Let's put an end to it today." A cold smile curled up on the corners of Jiansu's mouth. "We really should." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying strand of sword intent surged out explosively from within him, and then Xianxia's expression instantly changed drastically. The quasi-returnal rank. Jiansu's sword intent was actually at the quasi-returnal rank. Blind Maiden frowned slightly, but it didn't take long for her brows to relax. "No wonder you dared to show yourself. So you attained quasi-returnal rank sword intent." "The quasi-returnal rank?" Jiansu chuckled. "For now. It'll be at the true returnal rank soon." Blind Maiden didn't say anything, and she was about to attack instead. However, Xianxia suddenly appeared by her side, and she frowned when she noticed his arrival. "You're no match for them." Xianxia replied, "It's too unfair if they fight you 2-on-1. Even though her strength was heaven-defying, he'd realized that while she would definitely win in single combat against the dragon or Jiansu, she would definitely have no chance to win in a 2-on-1 battle. So he had to step forward. "Don't be anxious, you won't be able to escape as well." Meanwhile, Jiansu's gaze descended onto Xianxia, and he said, "Actually, you've truly surprised me. I'm extremely surprised. I have to admit that since my senior brother, Jian Wuji, your natural talent really is the best in the history of Dark Hell Continent. No, I should say that your natural talent has surpassed my senior brother." "Your senior brother?" Xianxia glanced at Jiansu. "Jian Wuji was your senior brother? Are you that surprised?" Jiansu smiled. "Xianxia, I actually really admire you, especially the way you do things. I think that a person like you is what a true sword cultivator is like. As for my senior brother, he stubbornly adhered to outworn ideas. Righteousness? Justice? I hate all that nonsense of his." Xianxia said, "So you destroyed his Sword God's palace?" "Of course I did." Jiansu had a ferocious expression on his face. "He was always there to push me down while he lived. Everything good in the Sword God's palace was his to use first. Everyone knew about him, Jian Wuji, yet no one knew about me, Jiansu. Fine, my strength was inferior to his. So it's normal for all the good treasures like the sword god's seal to be his. Yang Yi was quite puzzled. Since you understand, then why did you destroy sword god's palace? Jian Su's face grew even more vicious. Everything within the sword god's palace was his while he lived, and I accepted that because I was weaker. However, sword god's palace should have been under my control once he died, and the sword god's seal should have been mine. However, do you know what his will was? He willed that I, Jian Su, shouldn't be allowed to control sword god's palace, and the sword god's seal and stellar sword diagram shouldn't fall into my hands. He didn't want me to find out the secrets of the sword domain, and he didn't want me to surpass him one day. Ha ha ha. Jian Su gradually grew insane as he finished speaking. Yang Yi glanced at Jian Su, touched the sword god's seal on his forehead, and said, "You made me head to sword god's palace to make me get the sword god's seal? Because you'll be able to attain true returnal rank sword intent once you have it, right? You're very smart." Jian Su smiled. "Actually, I just wanted to give it a try, because that woman by your side hates sword cultivators to the bone. But I never expected you to actually go there and bring the sword god's seal back. You truly surprised me." Of course, I felt even more pleasantly surprised. However, the greatest pleasant surprise I got was that the sword god's seal had actually destroyed its own consciousness. Ha ha ha. Even the heavens were helping me. After all, it would be very troublesome to subdue it if its consciousness was still intact. Yang Yi glanced at Jian Su and said, "I still don't understand something. I got the sword god's seal a long time ago, and your strength far surpasses mine. So why didn't you seize it?" "He didn't dare to. It was Blind Maiden who spoke. Your strength isn't weak. He would have to expose his true strength in order to take it from you. So long as he did, I would find out immediately. The only reason he has dared to show himself now is because that demonic dragon has recovered from its injuries and grown much stronger." Jian Su laughed coldly. "It's not too late to take it now." Yang Yi gazed at Blind Maiden and laughed bitterly. "Would I be putting you in deep trouble if he gains the sword god's seal?" Blind Maiden was frank. "Yes." The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched slightly. He looked up at the dragon in the sky and said, "Both of them were no match for you all those years ago, so why didn't you kill that big fellow?" Blind Maiden pondered deeply for a moment before she said, "It hid deep down at the bottom of the ocean. I wouldn't be able to kill it if I fought it within the ocean. Moreover, if we did fight there, the ocean water here would flood the continent. Besides that, the core of the earth would explode apart as well. At that time, Dark Hell Continent would vanish completely. This is his home, and I don't want it destroyed." Yang Yi nodded. Indeed, if Blind Maiden and the dragon didn't fight high above in the sky, their strength was entirely capable of obliterating the entire continent. Suddenly, Jian Su looked up at the dragon and said, "Keep that woman busy. Just around 10 minutes will be enough." "All right." As soon as the dragon finished speaking, its claws shot down from above and clawed at Yang Yi and Blind Maiden. Blind Maiden gazed at Yang Yi and said, "How long can you hold on for?" Yang Yi shook his head. "I don't know." As soon as he finished speaking, he gazed at Blind Maiden and asked, "How long do you need to deal with that big fellow?" Blind Maiden replied, "I don't know as well." Yang Yi was speechless. Blind Maiden patted him lightly on the shoulder and said, "If you really can't hold on, then run. I won't blame you for doing that." As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a ray of light that shot up into the sky. "Run?" Yang Yi laughed bitterly. Would Jian Su let him run? Definitely not. Of course, Jian Su might let him run away if he handed the sword god's seal over obediently. But if he did that, wouldn't it be equivalent to coming here and causing trouble for Blind Maiden? Moreover, the sword god's seal belonged to him now. So, give it away? Impossible. Based on my understanding of you, you will definitely not just hand it over to me. So, I'll get it myself. Jian Su walked slowly in Yang Ye's direction. Every single step he took was accompanied by a strand of sword intent that surged out from within him. The sword intent didn't attack Yang Yi and just surged around Yang Yi, and they surrounded him. Obviously, Jian Su was worried that Yang Yi would flee. Even though he could catch up to Yang Yi, it would be a waste of time. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings. Once the quasi-returnal rank sword intent arrived around him, his own sword intent retreated and stopped right in front of him. However, his sword intent hadn't shrunk back into his body. Sword intent had a consciousness as well, and it was very well aware of Yang Yi's temper. If it didn't even dare to face Jian Su's sword intent, then Yang Yi might ignite his sword intent and burn it away again. After all, Yang Yi had done that on Sword God Mountain. It was fine to be no match for something, but it was an embarrassment to not even dare to try and fight. That was something that Yang Yi refused to tolerate as well. So, even if Jian Su's sword intent was stronger than Yang Yi's sword intent, it still didn't shrink back into his body. It didn't take long for Jian Su to arrive around 30 m away from Yang Yi, and he said, "The Sword God Seal can improve one's sword intent. Aren't you going to improve yours? If you don't, then the suppressive effects of my sword intent will cause you to be unable to fight back against me, right?" Yang Yi looked up at the sky. At this moment, Blind Maiden was clearly not holding back, and the entire sky was covered in flowing rays of light. At this moment, the Black Dragon's enormous figure had become a living punching bag, and it was completely suppressed before Blind Maiden's frenzied attacks. The Black Dragon's defeat was only a matter of time. Yang Yi remained silent for an instant before he looked up at Jian Su. "Everyone says that I'm the #1 sword cultivator of the continent. Actually, you are the best. Come, let me see how strong Jian Wuji's former junior brother is." Jian Su glanced at the ancient sheath in Yang Yi's grasp and nodded. "Then bring it on. Bring it on." As soon as Yang Yi finished speaking, he grabbed the hilt of his sword and drew it. How could Yang Yi dare to act carelessly when facing quasi-returnal rank sword intent? He'd immediately executed the true form of Heavenrend. OM! A sword howl suddenly resounded through the air, and then a dazzling beam of sword energy shot out from the ancient sheath. Space was instantly torn open like paper, and the space in an area of thousands of kilometers around the sword energy started to crack apart at this moment. Jian Su had a solemn expression on his face when Yang Yi drew the sword precursor from the ancient sheath. Actually, Yang Yi wasn't qualified to fight him. Even if he didn't possess quasi-returnal rank sword intent, Yang Yi was still no match for him. However, he didn't underestimate Yang Yi. Why? Because of the sword in Yang Yi's grasp. The combination of sword and sheath had transcended all ranks of quality. It was an existence on the level of the stellar sword diagram. Coupled with the fact that Yang Yi was a sword cultivator and possessed the Sword God Seal. How could Jian Su dare to underestimate Yang Yi? Simply speaking, while Yang Yi's cultivation and strength were inferior to him, Yang Yi's equipment were great. Yang Yi's equipment was almost heaven-defying. Jian Su didn't dare act carelessly. In an instant, a strand of terrifying sword intent appeared out of thin air before him, and then the space around him suddenly started to tremble violently. A moment later, countless golden swords of light shot out from the space around him, and they formed a dense rain of swords that rained down at Yang Yi's attack. Even though all of these golden swords of light were formed from energy, they were practically solid as they were enhanced by quasi-returnal rank sword intent. Every single one of them contained extremely terrifying destructive energy. Bang! 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 It didn't take long for numerous deafening explosions to resound, and then the space around Yang Yi and Jian Su cracked apart. In an instant, the space in an area of 5,000 kilometers around them had shattered into bits. An expanse of pitch black surrounded them. That wasn't the end of it. Countless rays of sword energy were shooting incessantly through the pitch-black expanse of space, causing even the black hole to tremble. Just like that, around 20-plus breaths of time passed, and then everything slowly returned to normal. Even space returned to normal. Yang Yi and Jian Su were standing facing each other, and there was around 3 kilometers between them. After a few moments of silence, Jian Su's chest suddenly cracked open, and countless strands of blood sprayed out from there. But it didn't take long for the injury on his chest to be covered by a strand of mysterious energy, and then it started to heal slowly. Jian Su looked up at Yang Yi and said, "A very strong sword technique. It's much stronger than any sword technique of the sword god's palace. Of course, the stellar sword diagram isn't included in that. Cough. Yang Yi coughed lightly, and then a trace of blood instantly seeped out slowly from the corner of his mouth. At the same time, his body turned red in an instant. If one looked carefully, one would notice that his entire body was covered in holes. His body was at the epic realm, so it was extremely strong. However, Jiansu was stronger. Could the man capable of destroying the sword god's palace be weak? It could be said that if Yang Yi didn't possess the sword precursor, he wouldn't even have the right to fight Jiansu. Even though it was quite embarrassing, it was the truth. Based on my estimations, you should only be able to execute that technique once more. Jiansu started walking towards Yang Yi and said, "Come, execute your final attack." As soon as he finished speaking, a strand of sword intent appeared out of thin air before him. At the same time, countless golden energy swords appeared in front of him. They formed a golden shield of energy swords. After that, rays of golden light flashed out from the shield and formed layers of barriers on top of the shield. At the same time, a strand of fierce sword intent pressed down upon Yang Yi. Yang Yi slowly clenched his right fist and glanced up into the sky. At this moment, Blind Maiden was still in fierce combat with the Black Dragon. The Black Dragon was still in a disadvantaged position, and it was practically being beaten up. However, it was obviously impossible for Blind Maiden to kill it in a short period. Yang Yi took a deep breath. He was very well aware that he couldn't place his hopes on her killing the Black Dragon and coming to his aid. So Yang Yi stopped hesitating, and the sword god's seal on his forehead lit up. It didn't take long for it to grow brighter and brighter. At the same time, his sword intent grew stronger and stronger. Bang! A few moments later, a strand of terrifying aura and sword intent erupted from within Yang Yi. And then the sword intent Jiansu had used to surround Yang Yi was instantly blasted away by Yang Ye's sword intent. Quasi-returnal rank sword intent. After he realized that Blind Maiden wouldn't be able to deal with the Black Dragon quickly, Yang Yi had decisively chosen to improve his sword intent to the quasi-returnal rank. Because only by attaining quasi-returnal rank sword intent would he be able to fight Jiansu. The quasi-returnal rank. Jiansu's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he tapped a finger forward. A golden energy sword instantly shot forward, and it was so swift that Yang Yi wasn't even able to see it clearly. Yang Yi was shocked and hurriedly issued a command for the phantom shield to emerge before him. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then Yang Yi was pushed around 1 kilometer away. Yang Yi gazed at the phantom shield before him. At this moment, it actually had cracks on it. So swift and strong. Yang Yi looked up at Jiansu. He didn't hesitate to stomp his right foot down, and his figure transformed into a flash of light that shot at Jiansu. Yang Yi clenched his sword's hilt tightly in midair while the profound energy within him surged madly. His profound energy surged into the ancient sheath while his physical strength converged completely. Yang Yi hadn't even drawn his sword, but just his speed and physical strength caused the space before him to be torn apart. Jiansu's expression grew gradually colder, and he raised his right hand slowly. In an instant, the shield before him that was formed from golden energy swords started to spin swiftly. As soon as it started revolving rapidly, strands of golden sword energy shot out from it, and it only took an instant for countless strands of golden sword energy to envelope Yang Yi. OM! Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from within the dense ocean of golden sword energy, and then the strands of golden sword energy were instantly dispersed. After that, a ray of light slammed against the golden shield. Bang! An explosion resounded as the golden shield instantly shattered. At the same time, Jiansu suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Bang! Another loud explosion resounded, and then the space here collapsed once more. An expanse of pitch black covered the area. It didn't take long for space to return to normal, but it only took an instant for the space there to collapse once more. This occurred over and over again in a cycle for over 10 times before the space here finally stabilized. Yang Yi and Jiansu stood 3 kilometers away from each other, and both of them stood there without moving. Xianxia's body was densely covered in holes, and it simply seemed like a myriad of arrows had pierced through him. It was extremely shocking. As for Jiansu, his left arm was gone. Amazing indeed. Meanwhile, Jiansu suddenly gazed at Yang Yi and said, "Amongst the sword techniques I've seen in my life, besides the sword formation created by the stellar sword diagram, there is no other sword technique that can compare to that sword technique of yours." He was naturally shocked. After all, he was around 3 realms above Yang Yi in cultivation. Even though Yang Yi had relied on external sources of strength to injure him, it was impossible to deny how terrifying Yang Yi was. "Unfortunately, I still wasn't able to kill you." Yang Yi looked up at Jiansu. He'd thought that once his sword intent rose to the quasi-returnal rank, he could rely on the true form of Heavenren to kill Jiansu with a single attack. But he was disappointed. Jiansu's strength was absolutely not inferior to Lady, and it might even be stronger. But it made sense. After all, Jiansu had lived for countless years. "Kill me?" Jiansu chuckled. "Yang Yi, if you can execute that sword technique without limits." "No, there's no need for it to be executed without limit. Even if you can execute it 5 times in a row, I would immediately turn around and leave. Unfortunately, your current strength is sufficient to execute it twice at most, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, Jiansu suddenly glanced at the sky. At this moment, the demonic dragon was completely suppressed and was practically being beaten up. Needless to say, it was really amusing to watch the enormous demonic dragon being beaten up by Blind Maiden who was countless times smaller than it. "She really is good at restraining herself." Jiansu laughed coldly, and then he gazed at Yang Yi. "Do you have other trump cards? You're buying time." Yang Yi's eyes narrowed slightly. Jiansu could have attacked right away. Even after he executed Heavenrend for the very first time, Jiansu could have seized the opportunity to attack. Based on Jiansu's strength and speed, it was entirely possible for Jiansu to kill him before he even had the chance to execute Heavenrend again. However, Jiansu hadn't done that. So, there was only one explanation, and it was that Jiansu was buying time. Why was Jiansu buying time? Yang Yi glanced up at the black dragon. Does he want to rely on Blind Maiden to kill that black dragon? That doesn't make sense. If that black dragon is killed, his strength alone would be utterly insufficient to fight Blind Maiden. Roar! Right when Yang Yi was feeling puzzled, the black dragon in the sky suddenly roared with fury. Both Yang Yi and Jiansu looked up simultaneously, and they saw a layer of thin black light appear around the black dragon. Once the black light appeared, not only were Blind Maiden's attacks unable to cause any harm to the black dragon, her attacks were even dispersed instead. Yang Ye's expression changed at the sight of this because the black dragon had grown stronger. The demonic dragon clan's shield of darkness. Practically all the clans of dragons have such a shield. Meanwhile, Jiansu suddenly smiled. Every time it's activated, their defenses and strength would be improved tremendously. However, it has a time limit. For example, he can only execute it once every 10 years. Now, I don't have to worry about anything, and the battle should come to an end. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiansu stretched his hand forward. In an instant, countless golden swords of light flashed out from the space around him, and then they formed a dense wave of golden swords that shot towards Yang Yi. Yang Yi's eyes narrowed slightly as he gazed at the dense expanse of golden swords of light. He'd thought of utilizing the sword domain to suppress Jiansu, but the problem was Jiansu's attainments in the sword Dao weren't the only thing that surpassed him. Even Jiansu's overall strength was much superior. The gap between him and Jiansu wasn't merely reflected in their attainments in the sword Dao, it was reflected in their cultivations as well. The sword domain could suppress Jiansu's sword intent, but it couldn't suppress his cultivation and strength. Jiansu's cultivation was way beyond him, so the consequences of utilizing the sword domain was having his lifespan exhausted. As expected of Jian Wuji's junior brother. As expected of the man who destroyed Sword God's palace. Yang Yi took a deep breath as he stretched his right hand forward, and he was about to bring his sword intent to the brink. However, ha ha ha! Roaring laughter suddenly resounded through the entire sky. As soon as the laughter resounded, the expressions of the Black Dragon, Blind Maiden, and Jian Su had changed. Yang Ye's expression had changed as well. Blind Maiden, Jian Su, and the Black Dragon were vigilant, but Yang Yi was overjoyed. Why? Because he knew the owner of the laughter. It was Xianxia who'd been sleeping for very, very long. I never expected to smell an evil aura upon waking up. Ha ha ha. As soon as these words finished resounding, a black shadow flashed out from Yang Ye's chest, and it didn't take long for Xianxia to appear before everyone. The expression on Blind Maiden's face eased up because Xianxia had emerged from within Yang Yi. In other words, Xianxia was with Yang Yi. As for Jian Su and the Black Dragon, their faces were quite unsightly. Especially the Black Dragon. Its enormous eyes were filled with seriousness and a trace of fear. It was a dragon, and it was at the top of the food chain within the demon race. Very few demon beasts could pose a threat to it, but this demon beast that it had never seen before felt extremely dangerous to it. What demon beast is that? The Black Dragon wasn't the only one who was filled with bewilderment. Jian Su was the same. It was very understandable that Jian Su and the Black Dragon didn't recognize Xianxia. After all, they weren't from the Radiant Dimension, and the group of defiant cultivators and ferocious beasts from all those years ago hadn't gone to Dark Hell Continent. So, both the Black Dragon and Jian Su's hearts were filled with bewilderment when they saw Xianxia's slightly strange appearance. Of course, they felt even more fear. After Xianxia appeared here, his gaze had immediately locked onto the demonic dragon in the sky, and there was a trace of greed in his eyes. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, "You're finally awake." Xianxia turned to look at Yang Yi, and he said angrily, "Isn't that all your fault? Actually, are you trying to give me trouble on purpose? Otherwise, why are you always in a hopeless situation when I wake up?" Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Xianxia continued, "Forget it. In any case, I'll only be staying with you for a few years. I refuse to believe that you can get me killed during that time." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at the demonic dragon in the sky. The Dragon Clan. Unfortunately, his bloodline isn't pure. Otherwise, I would have to fear him slightly. My bloodline isn't pure? The Black Dragon laughed coldly. Are you joking? I'm from the legitimate Dragon Clan of Dark Hell Continent, and the blood which flows within me is the purest bloodline of the Dragon Clan. The purest bloodline of the Dragon Clan? Xianxia interrupted the Black Dragon. How laughable. You actually say that you possess the purest bloodlines. Do you know what a true dragon is like? Do you know how terrifying a true dragon is? No, you don't. Right, allow me to correct myself. You're not the only one with an impure bloodline. Your ancestor is the same. This world. No, this universe doesn't have a true dragon. The dragons here can only be considered as part of the branch clans of the true Dragon Clan. The laughable thing is that you actually think that you're a true dragon. What nonsense! The Black Dragon spoke with fury. Lowly being that came out of nowhere. You actually dare to disrespect my Dragon Clan? Lowly? Viciousness flashed through Xianxia's eyes. A moment later, he transformed into a ray of red light that shot up into the air towards the Black Dragon. Humph! The Black Dragon grunted while viciousness flashed through his eyes as well, and then he slammed his body towards Xianxia. Yang Yi and the others watched as the Black Dragon and Xianxia collided. Bang! Yang Yi and the others watched with astonishment as the Black Dragon, which was countless times larger than Xianxia, was actually knocked away. Moreover, countless fine cracks had actually appeared on the barrier of light around the Black Dragon. Meanwhile, Xianxia didn't stop, and his figure flashed and shot towards the Black Dragon again. Bang! 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 Numerous explosions resounded from above the sky. The Black Dragon wasn't just pushed back repeatedly by the violent attacks from Xianxia. Over 100 injuries which were over 100 m long had appeared on his body. They were naturally created by Xianxia's claws. The demonic dragon's defenses had risen countless times higher after executing the Shield of Darkness. But Xianxia's claws were even sharper. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he witnessed this scene. He'd been quite worried. After all, Xianxia hadn't been so strong before he fell into a deep slumber. Now it would seem like his worries were unnecessary. Xianxia's strength had definitely been recovering slowly during his deep sleep. Even though he didn't know how much Xianxia had recovered, he had no doubt that Xianxia wasn't the same Xianxia from before who could only kill emperors. Jiansu's face was gloomy when he saw the black dragon being pushed back repeatedly. He'd planned for every contingency, but he hadn't expected Yang Yi to have such a terrifying existence like Xianxia with him. Flee? Such a thought appeared in Jiansu's mind, but he rejected it in an instant. Blind Maiden was here, so it would be utterly impossible for him to flee. Nor did he want to flee, because he'd been fleeing for thousands of years. Jiansu took a deep breath, and the profound energy within him surged madly. After that, the space around him started to tremble violently. Yang Ye's expression changed at the sight of this. Since Jiansu hadn't fled, it was obvious that Jiansu intended to make his final stand. But Yang Yi wasn't able to execute Heavenren now, so he was utterly incapable of being a threat to Jiansu. Moreover, he'd started to suffer backlash from his sword intent. Suddenly, Blind Maiden appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then she tapped her finger against the center of Yang Ye's forehead. Yang Yi instantly felt a strand of mysterious energy enter his mind. As soon as it did, his mind immediately cleared up significantly, and the backlash seemed to have weakened slightly. Blind Maiden withdrew her hand and said, "Go meditate. Don't let the backlash progress further. Leave the rest to me." Yang Yi nodded, and then his figure flashed and appeared 30 kilometers away. He'd used his ultimate moves, but he still hadn't been able to kill Jiansu. So, if he were to stay here, then he would only be a burden for Xianxia and Blind Maiden. Yang Yi paid no attention to the battle. He just sat down cross-legged, withdrew violet crystals, and started to absorb them. As the energy surged into him, the tiny vortex immediately started to spin, and then threads of violet energy flowed out from the tiny vortex before spreading throughout his body and repaired the injuries that Jiansu had inflicted on him. Jian Xu stared fixedly at Blind Maiden. Besides seriousness, there was a trace of ferocity in them as well. If it wasn't for Blind Maiden, he would have obtained the stellar sword diagram and left this world a long time ago. However, it was exactly because of Blind Maiden that he hadn't just been unable to obtain the stellar sword diagram. He'd almost lost his life as well. Even though he'd survived in the end, he didn't dare to reveal his true identity to others and had no choice but to hide. It was all because of the woman before him. Jiansu closed his eyes slowly while the quasi-returnal rank sword intent around him grew denser and denser in volume, and it grew sharper and sharper as well. Even the space around him was trembling more and more rapidly. A moment of silence later, Jiansu suddenly opened his eyes, and then he pressed his index and middle fingers together before pointing them at Blind Maiden from afar. OM! An ear-piercing sword howl resounded through the sky, and then the space around Jiansu collapsed. Countless pitch-black energy swords flashed out from the huge black hole, and they shot off in Blind Maiden's direction. Blind Maiden's expression remained calm and composed as she stretched her hand forward. In an instant, countless rays of light shot out from her like a meteor shower, and they slammed against the energy swords before her. Bang! 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 Explosions resounded incessantly within the black hole. Yang Yi couldn't help but open his eyes and shoot a glance towards the battlefield. At this moment, Blind Maiden and Jiansu were within a black hole, and energy swords and rays of light were flashing and colliding incessantly there. The entire black hole had warped, and it seemed to be unable to endure their strength. They were true experts. Yang Yi was very well aware that while he seemed to have fought Jiansu earlier, he'd merely been relying on his equipment. Moreover, Jiansu had wanted to delay. Otherwise, he might have been beaten down a long time ago. There was a huge gap between him and Jiansu right now. A person could be confident, but couldn't be conceited, and it was very important to understand one's limitations and avoid becoming lost within the power gained from external sources. Roar! Suddenly, a shrill cry resounded from high above. Yang Yi was shocked and hurriedly looked up, and he was stunned by the scene before his eyes. At this moment, Xianxia was actually eating the black dragon's tail. Xianxia had grabbed the black dragon's enormous tail with his claws, and he was swiftly biting and eating the dragon. No matter how the black dragon shook his body, it didn't make a difference. The speed Xianxia devoured the black dragon was quite shocking, or it should be described as abnormal. In just a few breaths of time, he'd consumed around 10% of the black dragon's tail. Moreover, the speed he ate was growing faster and faster. As for the black dragon, his enormous eyes were filled with terror. Moreover, he seemed to shake his body and shrink it incessantly with the goal of escaping Xianxia. It didn't take long for his figure to shrink down to a size of 300 m, and then he immediately shot towards the ocean below. Suddenly, Blind Maiden's voice resounded. "Don't let him get into the ocean." There was no need for Blind Maiden to warn him. Xianxia had already transformed into a ray of light that shot towards the black dragon. The black dragon's speed was clearly inferior to Xianxia, so Xianxia caught up in an instant. Xianxia watched with astonishment as Xianxia grabbed the black dragon's tail and dragged the black dragon back to where they came from, and then started eating again. Roar! The black dragon's shrill and miserable howls resounded incessantly, and it was filled with terror and despair. Xianxia paid no attention to the black dragon and ceaselessly tore the black dragon apart. The black dragon was gradually dissected into pieces. The most terrifying part about this was that the black dragon was still alive. But the black dragon could only watch as his body was being torn into countless pieces and eaten. Around a few dozen breaths of time later, that area in the sky had returned to normal. The black dragon was nowhere to be found, and only Xianxia's ceaselessly burping figure remained there. Xianxia was stunned for a long time, and then he hurriedly pointed at Jiansu and said, "Brother Xianxia, kill him." Xianxia glanced at Xianxia before he turned to look at Jiansu, and then his figure shot towards Jiansu. Jiansu's countenance instantly turned ghastly pale when he saw Xianxia shoot towards him, and a wisp of despair arose in his eyes. Blind Maiden didn't stand by idly. Her figure flashed and transformed into a ray of light that surged towards Jiansu. Could Jiansu resist Xianxia and Blind Maiden's joint forces? Of course he couldn't. However, right when Jiansu was about to lose his life, a beam of light had suddenly shot up into the sky, and then a white figure appeared before Jiansu. Bang! A terrifying aura surged out from the white figure, and then both Blind Maiden and Xianxia were instantly blasted 3 kilometers away. Xianxia was at a loss for words. Who is this? Xianxia's face fell. That person's strength was clearly extremely formidable, or it would have been impossible for him to blast both Xianxia and Blind Maiden away. Moreover, that person was clearly on Jiansu's side. Blind Maiden frowned as well. Obviously, she hadn't expected another expert like this to be present in this world. There was a trace of seriousness in Xianxia's eyes too, because there was a deep mark on his claws. Jiansu's eyes had a trace of bewilderment in them as well. He hadn't expected an expert to suddenly appear before him and even help him. The white light surrounding the figure gradually dispersed before their eyes, and it didn't take long for a slightly ethereal middle-aged man with a sword on his back to appear before them. Jian Wuji. Jiansu's eyes instantly opened wide when he saw the middle-aged man. Xianxia's eyes opened wide as well when he heard Jian Wuji. Jian Wuji? That middle-aged man is Jian Wuji? What a joke. Isn't he dead? Did he not die? That's impossible. A string of questions flashed through Xianxia's mind. While Xianxia was still puzzled, Blind Maiden suddenly spoke while standing at his side. It's a strand of the soul. A soul. Xianxia was slightly stunned and turned around to look at Jian Wuji. Sure enough, Jian Wuji's body was ethereal, and it really was the body of a soul. Xianxia frowned. Why has he come here now? What does he want? Blind Maiden didn't attack as well, and she was just looking at Jian Wuji's soul. However, Xianxia noticed that her hands were clenched together tightly. Xianxia knew that it didn't matter if a strand of Jian Wuji's soul was here. Even if Jian Wuji was here in the flesh, she would probably not give up on killing Jiansu. It was obvious how deep her hatred was based on how she'd been willing to stay on the continent for thousands of years. Jian Wuji nodded slightly to Xianxia and the others, and then his gaze descended onto Xianxia. Or to be more precise, it had descended onto Xianxia's forehead. Jian Wuji gazed at Yang Ye's forehead for a short while before he shook his head slightly. His consciousness has been eliminated. He still did that in the end. As he spoke, he sized up Yang Yi and said, "Not bad." Jian Su had quite a complicated expression on his face when he heard Jian Wuji. Jian Wuji was a genius and he had extremely high standards. So ordinary people weren't able to be acknowledged by him at all. No one throughout Sword God's palace had even received his praise, including Jian Su himself. Yet now, Jian Wuji had said that Yang Yi wasn't bad. But it was normal because while Jian Su was Yang Ye's enemy, he really approved of Yang Ye's natural talent and strength. Meanwhile, Yang Yi asked, "Senior, didn't you die?" Jian Wuji shook his head slightly. "I wasn't able to let go of some things, so I left a strand of my soul behind." Yang Yi glanced at Jian Su and said, "This junior brother of yours destroyed Sword God's palace all those years ago. Senior, why didn't you stop him?" Jian Wuji replied, "I was in a deep sleep. My soul had no source of energy, so if I didn't go to deep sleep and preserve my remaining energy, this strand of my soul would vanish once the energy within it dispersed. Just like this very moment, I'll vanish completely in a moment. Because I haven't just shown myself, I've even fought. Right? The reason I'm here is because your battle jolted me awake. Of course, I would be waking up soon even if all of you weren't fighting here." Yang Yi glanced at Jian Wuji and asked, "What's your goal?" Jian Wuji smiled, and then he looked up into the sky. After being corroded for thousands of years, that remaining energy that he unintentionally left behind should be extremely weak now. Yang Yi was visibly moved. "Senior, you left this strand of your soul behind to break open the restrictions above the continent?" Jian Wuji nodded. "It is no restriction. If he wanted to destroy Dark Hell Continent, he wouldn't have had to go to such trouble. That's just energy that was left behind during my battle with him. All those years ago, the gray energy was still very strong, and this strand of my soul wasn't strong enough to break it open. Yet now, it should be possible." Yang Yi gazed at Jian Wuji for a long time before he asked, "Was it worth it?" Needless to say, Yang Yi felt quite a bit of admiration towards Jian Wuji. Jian Wuji hadn't just sacrificed himself for the continent all those years ago. He'd even left a strand of his soul behind to wait thousands of years to destroy the restrictions over the continent. In any case, if he was in Jian Wuji's position, he would definitely not do that. Yang Yi, was a selfish person, and it was something even he admitted. As far as he was concerned, the most important were his loved ones and friends, and he placed them first at all times. As for a selfless person like Jian Wuji, even though he couldn't be like Jian Wuji, he admired such a person, because he could sense that Jian Wuji was sincerely thinking for the sake of Dark Hell Continent, and there were no selfish interests behind it. Jian Wuji chuckled. "This is the place that gave birth to me and nurtured me. Moreover, there are billions of living beings here. How could I just abandon it? I could if I didn't have the ability, but I just happen to have some ability. Since I did, then not taking action would go against my heart and my convictions towards the Sword Dao. You're a sword cultivator, so you should understand me, right?" Yang Yi nodded. He naturally did. Every single sword cultivator had a different conviction. His was selfish. He would only act when it was beneficial to him, and he wouldn't even care if it was right or wrong. This was naturally beneficial, and the benefit was being unrestrained. As for Jian Wuji, to put it in a more direct manner, Yang Yi was a bad person while Jian Wuji was a good person. The bad usually lived longer because the bad would only do things that are beneficial to them. As for the good usually had to do some things that weren't good for them yet were good for others. Jian Wuji was a person like that. He'd sacrificed himself for the sake of others. So, while Yang Yi refused to do that, he still respected such individuals. Jian Wuji nodded slightly, and then he turned to look at Jian Su. As he gazed at Jian Su, a trace of complicated emotions appeared in his eyes. "I knew that you would be angry that I didn't allow you to take control of the Sword God's palace and the Stellar Sword diagram, but I never expected you to destroy Sword God's palace because of that." Jian Su spoke with a slightly fierce expression. "Aren't you the one who forced my hand?" Jian Wuji shook his head and said, Do you know why I didn't allow it? Jiansu spoke angrily. I really want to know the answer as well. Jian Wuji replied, your natural talent isn't bad. All those years ago, it was the best in Sword God's palace besides me. However, your heart is always distracted, and you always wanted to take shortcuts. Yet you didn't realize that there are no shortcuts on the path of the sword. I didn't want you to take control of Sword God's palace because I hoped that you would concentrate on cultivating the sword and avoid getting your heart clouded by authority. As for the stellar sword diagram, it was because I didn't want you to take a shortcut. Because you wanted the stellar sword diagram to use it as a shortcut to comprehend the sword domain, right? As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wuji shook his head. You knew that the stellar sword diagram requires the sword domain in order to be utilized. I know that if you obtained it, you would definitely concentrate all your attention onto studying it. If that really happened, you'll always be living beneath my shadow and would never be able to advance a step further. You're lying. Jiansu suddenly howled with fury. You didn't let me have them because you didn't want to let me surpass you. That's the true reason. Jiansu glanced at Jiansu, who seemed to have gone slightly mad. And then he said, you know very well that I've never been fond of lying. I only speak what I think. Moreover, there's no need for me to lie to you. He isn't lying. Meanwhile, Blind Maiden suddenly said, all those years ago, you merely possessed peak rebirth rank sword intent. Yet now you're attained the quasi-returnal rank. Do you know why? Because you temporarily gave up on the stellar sword diagram and the sword god's palace. If I'm not wrong, you've definitely placed all your attention on the sword Dao, right? Jiansu's face was pale while a lost expression filled his eyes. A short moment of silence later, Jian Wuji turned to look at Blind Maiden. Can you spare him? She shook her head in response. He has to die, even if you were here in the flesh. Jiansu gazed at her for a long time. He was about to speak when Yang Yi suddenly spoke with surprise. He! Jian Wuji turned around and saw faint flames coming from Jiansu. Soul ignition. Jiansu had ignited his soul. Does he intend to improve his strength from igniting his soul? Such a thought had appeared in Yang Ye's mind, but it didn't take long for him to reject the possibility. Because Jiansu's aura hadn't risen explosively at all, and it was Jiansu's vitality that was being lost incessantly. Jian Wuji asked, why? Jiansu remained silent. His body was gradually growing translucent, and it was becoming even more translucent than Jian Wuji. Right when Jiansu was about to vanish completely, he suddenly looked up and gazed at Jian Wuji. Senior brother? I'm sorry. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure vanished on the spot. Jian Wuji closed his eyes slowly. He remained silent for a long while before opening his eyes, and then he looked up at the sky. There are many things and people in this world that we'll only cherish once we lose them. Yet we never realize that it's too late to only cherish them then. Young one, cherish those around you. As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wuji slowly walked up into the sky. Meanwhile, Xianxia gazed at Jian Wuji and said, that fellow isn't bad. Blind Maiden spoke as well. An outstanding individual. Yang Yi nodded and looked up at the sky. At this moment, Jian Wuji was growing faster and faster, and it didn't take long for Jian Wuji's figure to transform into a ray of light that vanished from their fields of vision. Treat Dark Hell Continent well. Jian Wuji's voice resounded from high above. At this moment, everyone throughout the continent could hear his voice. After that, bang! The sky shook violently, and a loud explosion resounded throughout the entire continent. It didn't take long for a starry sky to appear within their vision. The restriction was gone. The vast starry sky was studded with an array of countless stars. It was profound and enchanting. Specks of starlight descended from the sky above and covered the ground in a thin veil of crystal blue. So the starry sky is that beautiful. Countless people had such thoughts. As for some voiders, it wasn't just pure curiosity and excitement that they felt overjoyed and relieved as well. Because Dark Hell Continent was like a cage to them, a cage made specially for voiders like them. They could never advance in their cultivation while residing on the continent, and all they could do was wait for death to arrive. Fortunately, the restrictions were gone, so they were free. Yang Yi, Blind Maiden, and Xianxia remained silent for a long time. In the end, Xianxia suddenly said, "I have to absorb the energy within that mixed blood dragon, so don't disturb me while I'm doing that. If something happens, deal with it yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia transformed into a ray of light that entered Yang Ye's chest. Yang Yi felt speechless. Meanwhile, Blind Maiden suddenly said, "Come with me." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and walked off to the ground below. Yang Yi hurriedly followed her, and he felt slightly excited. Why? Because he'd heard that she had the stellar sword diagram. It was a treasure. As for what Jian Wuji said about relying on one's own self and not relying on treasures to take shortcuts, that was spoken to Jian Su, but he'd already comprehended the sword domain, so what shortcut would he take? Actually, as far as Yang Yi was concerned, treasures were a form of strength as well. Of course, he wouldn't overly rely on them. He felt that treasures could be utilized to improve his strength, but he couldn't rely on them. He had to manage that well, and so long as he did, the more treasures he had, the better it would be for him. However, if he failed, he would lose himself and become reliant on them instead. So, it was all a problem of attitude. Yang Yi followed Blind Maiden to that huge rock by the ocean that Blind Maiden frequently sat on. She waved her hand lightly, and it didn't take long for the ocean water to suddenly recede. It receded extremely swiftly, and it only took a moment for the ocean water before them to recede over 1 kilometer away. After that, a grave covered in stones appeared before them. Yang Yi followed her over to it. The grave was a normal size, and it had no tombstone or anything special about it. It was just made from the most ordinary rock. Blind Maiden remained silent for a long time, and then she said, "We were childhood friends, and he was a sword cultivator just like you. At that time, all he wanted was to join Sword God's palace because it was the sacred grounds of all sword cultivators throughout the continent. However, his natural talent wasn't good, so he was rejected repeatedly by Sword God's palace. He had no choice but to cultivate bitterly in order to join Sword God's palace. At that time, I was always there by his side as he cultivated. He cultivated very diligently. In the end, he succeeded at joining Sword God's palace, but he was merely a nominal disciple." Yang Yi glanced at the stone grave in silence. Blind Maiden combed her hair that had become messy from the ocean winds, and she continued. "He said that once he became an outer court disciple, he would come for me and take me to Sword God's palace." She paused for a moment at this point, and then she continued, "Only then did I realize that he hadn't wanted to join Sword God's palace for himself, and it was for my sake." Yang Yi was puzzled. "For you?" She nodded slightly. "I hadn't awakened then. Not only were my meridians blocked, my body was extremely weak to the point it was weaker than an ordinary person. The Sword God's palace was the stronger power on the continent, and it had countless herbs and treasures. The reason he'd worked so hard to join Sword God's palace was that he hoped to get medicine for me. Unfortunately, he didn't know that no medicine could heal my body." Yang Yi remained silent. Blind Maiden continued. "He worked hard and succeeded in becoming an outer court disciple. Because of the willpower and diligence he showed, an elder of Sword God's palace took a liking to him, and that elder accepted him as his disciple. Moreover, that elder agreed to help heal me. However, at the same time, Jian Su colluded with that demonic dragon to launch a surprise attack on Sword God's palace." Blind Maiden paused for a moment at this point, and then she continued. "Because Jian Su knew everything about Sword God's palace's formation and strength, all the experts of Sword God's palace were slaughtered by their joint forces. That included him." When she spoke up to this point, Yang Yi noticed that 2 beads of tears seeped out from the corners of Blind Maiden's eyes, and they were blood red. A long moment of silence passed before the beads of blood-red tears vanished into thin air. "The breeze here is quite strong." As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her hand lightly, and the ocean breeze in the surroundings couldn't get close to her or Yang Yi anymore. Yang Yi remained silent. Blind Maiden continued. "From the moment I knew he was gone, my tears never stopped. In the end, I became blind, and then I awakened. There are two things in my life that I regret the most. The first is being unable to help my big sister and second sister all those years ago, and the second thing is not going blind earlier. He wouldn't have died if I went blind earlier. Xianxia shook his head. Needless to say, the demonic dragon and Xianxia definitely felt extremely aggrieved. Because they'd merely killed someone they regarded as an ant, and then Blind Maiden trapped them here for thousands of years before they finally died. But all of this had only been because they'd killed an insignificant outer court disciple. There were risks when one killed another, so one had to be cautious at all times. I trapped the dragon, but Xianxia escaped. However, I knew that he would be back because I took the stellar sword diagram. Meanwhile, Blind Maiden added, as I expected, he returned once that demonic dragon had fully recuperated. Actually, I could have killed that dragon a very long time ago. However, Xianxia would definitely go completely into hiding if I had killed that dragon. For the sake of killing them, I had no choice but to wait until that demonic dragon recovered completely. Actually, you would have been able to kill them even if I and Xianxia weren't here, right? Asked Xianxia. Based on how she fought earlier, he knew that she had definitely not used her full strength. Blind Maiden fell silent for a short while and said, "Your arrival surprised me slightly." Xianxia replied, "You've helped me so many times, and you're Nether Maiden's third sister. So, how could I possibly stand by idly and do nothing?" Blind Maiden turned to look at Xianxia. Even though her eyes were closed, Xianxia could sense that she was looking at him. A long time passed before she nodded slightly and said, "There's a Ling in my name. You can call me Big Sister Ling." If she'd helped him before out of consideration for Nether Maiden and the others, then now she truly acknowledged Xianxia and treated him like a younger brother. Xianxia was slightly stunned, and then he smiled. "Big Sister Ling." He didn't lose anything from calling her Big Sister, and he should be said to have gained instead. After all, she was an extraordinary expert. Moreover, she was Nether Maiden's third sister. He'd gone through life and death with Nether Maiden, so he should address Blind Maiden as Big Sister. Blind Maiden nodded slightly, and then she turned around and walked over to the grave. A long time of silence ensued before she spoke softly. "I'm leaving. Once I'm done with what I need to do, I'll come here and accompany you until the end of time." As soon as she finished speaking, she walked over to Xianxia, grabbed his shoulder, and shot up into the sky. Once they left, the ocean water instantly filled up the area, and the grave was instantly submerged below the water. High above in the sky, Blind Maiden said, "I'm leaving." Xianxia asked, "Where are you going?" She replied, "To a place I should have gone to a long time ago." Xianxia remained silent for a while, and then he said, "Do you know where Clouds of Heaven stellar region is?" It was the stellar region that Lady was from, but he knew nothing about it. However, he knew that Blind Maiden possessed extensive knowledge and should know where it was. "Clouds of Heaven?" Blind Maiden asked, "You're going there?" Xianxia nodded. Blind Maiden explained, "If you want to head there or the Radiant Dimension, you must first go to a place." Xianxia hurriedly asked, "What place?" She replied, "Stellar City." "Stellar City?" Xianxia was puzzled. "Is it a world?" Blind Maiden explained. "It's a city, but can also be called a world, because only that city exists in that world. There are many stellar teleportation formations within the city, and you can teleport to any other stellar region besides the large world. Stellar City was created by a clan in the large world, and it's focused on providing services to the medium and small worlds. Of course, there's a fee to utilize them." Xianxia asked, "How do I get there?" Blind Maiden looked up at the sky and said, "There's a stellar teleportation formation in every stellar region, and there's one here as well. So, once you leave Dark Hell Continent, continue north through space and you'll find one. Enter it and you'll arrive at Stellar City." Xianxia nodded. "Understood." Meanwhile, Blind Maiden added, "You're too headstrong, firm, and rash. This character of yours is bound to bring endless troubles to you. However, it's that character of yours which allowed you to possess your current accomplishments. You should realize that there's no way back for you, and you can only advance courageously and ceaselessly strengthen yourself. Only then can you act according to your will and stay true to your heart. Understand? Yang Yi nodded. He naturally understood Nether Maiden. He'd offended countless people because of his character, and it had brought him all sorts of trouble. But he couldn't change his character. Yang Yi was really unable to accept injustice to himself so that others would be happy. As far as he was concerned, if anyone bullied him, then he would repay that person tenfold. He repaid his debts and took revenge on the enmity he had. It was the principle he lived by, and it was his character. Blind Maiden looked down at where the grave was below the ocean, and she gazed at that spot for a long time before she said, "Wait for me!" As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a beam of light that shot up into the sky and charged towards the starry sky beyond it. Yang Yi was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "The stellar!" He hadn't even finished speaking when a ray of white light suddenly shot down from the starry sky above him. It was extremely swift and instantly arrived before him. Yang Yi was instantly stunned when the white light dispersed. It was a rag that was floating before him. He'd seen this rag because it was the exact same one that had been on Blind Maiden's stomach when he met her for the first time. However, he'd thought that it was there to patch her clothes. But it was obviously not a patch, or Blind Maiden wouldn't have given it to him. Yang Yi gazed at it for a short while, and then he flicked a strand of sword intent into it. Bang! The rag instantly emanated a strand of dazzling light, and then a crystal blue diagram appeared before Yang Yi. The diagram was around 1 meter long and half a meter wide, but the diagram was empty. There was nothing on it. The stellar sword diagram. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a long time before he placed his right hand on the diagram, and then the sword intent within him surged out madly. After his sword intent surged into it, the entire diagram started to tremble violently. In the blind of an eye, it vanished, and the scene around Yang Yi changed at the exact same instant that it vanished. The starry sky. At this moment, Yang Yi was amidst the stars. Countless stars were above and all around him. Meanwhile, the sword spirit appeared by his side. She spoke solemnly, "This is a real world." Yang Yi nodded. As soon as his sword intent surged into the stellar sword diagram, it brought him up into the starry sky. In other words, he wasn't in an illusory realm, and he was in a real world. The sword spirit suddenly said, "These aren't real stars." Yang Yi was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The sword spirit replied, "A star might be billions of kilometers away from us, yet see how they are so close, extremely close." She paused for a moment and continued, "If I'm not wrong, this is definitely a projection of an area in space within our universe that Jian Wuji created." Yang Yi felt even more puzzled. A projection of space? The sword spirit nodded. He utilized his extraordinary ability to create a projection of the stars in space within the stellar sword diagram. Simply speaking, the stellar sword diagram is a miniature of space in this universe. As for the stars within the diagram, they are definitely linked to the real stars in our universe. So, when you activate this diagram, you'll be able to draw upon the energy within those stars. Yang Yi gained a rough understanding when she explained it in that way. The stellar sword diagram was something Jian Wuji had created based on the universe, and he'd modeled it after the starry sky in this universe. However, the stars within the stellar sword diagram weren't independent, and they were linked to the stars in this universe. So, when he activated the stars within it, he could use them as a medium to utilize the energy of those real stars in the depths of the universe. It could be said that he was actually in an illusory world, because these stars around him weren't real stars, and they were projections of the stars in this universe. Yang Yi asked, "How do I draw upon the energy of these stars?" The sword spirit replied, "Try using your sword intent." Yang Yi nodded, and then rebirth rank sword intent appeared out of thin air around him. In an instant, it enveloped all the stars here. Once his sword intent appeared here, the stars immediately started emanating faint light. This light wasn't starlight, but the glow of sword energy. However, besides that, there were no further changes. Yang Yi gazed at the sword spirit. "What's going on?" She glanced at the surroundings, and then gazed at Yang Yi. Try activating the sword domain. Yang Yi nodded and took a step forward. In an instant, the entire expanse of space here was enveloped by his sword domain, and then the stars instantly started to tremble lightly. At the same time, Yang Ye's expression instantly changed. He was shocked. Why? He ruled everything within the sword domain, and he could control everything and become one with everything within the sword domain. At the moment he activated the sword domain, he'd sensed countless stars. It was quite inconceivable, but he really did sense them. Countless stars. Yang Yi wasn't just able to sense every single star here. He could sense the actual stars they were linked to. In other words, he could sense the stars throughout Dark Hell stellar region via the stellar sword diagram. Not only was he able to sense them, he could even sense that he'd formed a slight connection with them. I understand why the stellar sword diagram needs the sword domain to be utilized. Meanwhile, the sword spirit said, Jian Wuji created it from observing the universe. If I'm not wrong, he used the sword domain when he was creating it. Only by utilizing the sword domain could he sense these stars clearly and create the stellar sword diagram. Once it is utilized, the person utilizing it must sense those stars and form a link with them, and only by possessing the sword domain will that be possible. Moreover, only the sword domain can accomplish that. Yang Yi asked, how do I utilize the stellar sword diagram? The sword spirit glanced at the surroundings and said, you lack a sword. As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a sword that appeared in the distance, and then the stars in the surroundings started to tremble violently. Meanwhile, the sword spirit said, use them as your medium to utilize the energy of the stars in this stellar region, and then release stellar sword energy. Yang Yi asked, is that possible? Of course. The sword spirit replied, these stars contain stellar energy. Now, you have to use the stars in the stellar sword diagram as your medium to utilize the stars in this stellar region and transform their stellar energy into sword energy. Let me try. As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi closed his eyes. OM. 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 Quite some time passed before countless sword howls resounded throughout Dark Hell stellar region. After that, countless stars in the starry sky above Dark Hell stellar region emanated strands of stellar sword energy. The stellar sword energy were like shooting stars that descended successively towards Dark Hell continent. At this moment, practically everyone throughout the continent was looking up, and their eyes were filled with shock, disbelief, and terror. Is the end of the world upon us? That was what everyone thought right now, because their fields of vision were filled with a dense expanse of stellar sword energy that was descending towards them. The entire sky was densely packed with stellar sword energy. It was absolutely terrifying, but it didn't take long for the sword energy to vanish abruptly. Countless people heaved sighs of relief at the sight of this. Meanwhile, in the stellar sword diagram, Yang Yi was covered in sweat. His eyes were filled with threads of blood, and his face was pale as a sheet. Moreover, if one looked carefully, one would notice that there were some strands of white hair on his head. Especially, the hair at the sides of his head. They were especially striking and practically completely snow white. The sword spirit asked, are you all right? Yang Yi took a deep breath and laughed bitterly. I almost killed myself. He'd succeeded at creating stellar sword energy, but he'd paid a price for that. That price was quite terrifying because he'd lost almost 3,000 years of his lifespan. 3,000 years. After all, the lifespan of an emperor was usually around 10,000 years. In other words, he'd lost 30% of it in just that short moment. Fortunately, he'd stopped in time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lost just 3,000 years, he might have been completely crippled instead. I was careless. Meanwhile, the sword spirit spoke solemnly. Based on your current strength, your sword domain can't endure so much stellar energy at all. Yang Yi nodded. How much stellar energy was there throughout Dark Hell stellar region? Such a tremendous amount of stellar energy wasn't something he could endure right now. Actually, he was lucky that he was an emperor now. If he was still a quasi-emperor, then it was obvious that he would have died in just a moment. It wasn't too bad now. If he went all out, then it would be entirely possible to activate the stellar sword formation once. However, the price was quite huge, and it was much greater than the ignition of his intent or soul. After all, those merely made him lose a realm of cultivation or a rank of sword intent. But this would take his life. The sword spirit said, "It's best to avoid utilizing it if you can." Xianxia laughed bitterly. Of course. Actually, the stellar sword formation was extremely terrifying. Could be said that if he utilized it against Jiansu, then Jiansu would definitely be obliterated into bits. Not to mention Jiansu, it was even possible for him to destroy the entire continent. If the sword energy from before had descended upon Dark Hell continent, then even if it wasn't completely destroyed, at least over 90% of the living beings on the continent would have been annihilated. Countless strands of stellar sword energy. Even he didn't know how many there were. Right? Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly said, "Wouldn't it be useless after I leave this stellar region?" Of course it wouldn't. The sword spirit said, "Its ability is to copy the stars in the region it's in. Thus, so long as stars are present, it can be activated." Xianxia smiled. Good. The sword spirit asked, "Do you know one of the sword domain's abilities now?" Xianxia remained silent for a while before he nodded. "Actually, I've grasped some abilities of the sword domain for a long time now." What could the sword domain accomplish? It could suppress sword intent that was stronger than his own, suppress all laws, replicate some laws, conceal his aura, allow him to cultivate sword techniques quickly. Now, he'd learned another ability of the sword domain. It was the ability to sense bodies of energy, and he could use them as a medium to summon sword energy. For example, if he had violet crystals around him now, then he just had to activate the sword domain, sense the violet crystals, and build a link between him and them. After that, he could just utilize the energy within them to form sword energy to attack his enemies. Jian Wuji had utilized that exact same principle to create the stellar sword diagram. However, he knew that his sword domain couldn't cover all the stars in a stellar region. So, he'd created the stellar sword diagram, and he utilized it as a medium to sense the actual stars in the stellar region. He used a small copy to sense the enormous region they represented. Needless to say, Jian Wuji was a genius. Meanwhile, the sword spirit asked, "Now do you know why the sword domain is terrifying?" Xianxia nodded. He naturally knew why. When the day came that his sword domain could cover an entire stellar region, then all bodies of energy within the stellar region could be utilized to form sword energy. If his sword domain could cover an entire universe. If Xianxia's sword domain could cover the universe, then all bodies of energy in the universe could be utilized to form sword energy. Just thinking about it caused Xianxia to feel quite excited, but it didn't take long for him to wake up from that dream. Cover the entire universe? His sword domain could only cover an area of around 5,000 kilometers. So, covering the entire universe was quite far away from him. However, Xianxia was in no rush. He was just an emperor right now, and his sword domain would improve along with his cultivation. So, the day would come when he could accomplish that. Xianxia restrained his thoughts, glanced at the boundless starry sky around him, and then issued a command in his heart. In an instant, everything around him started to become ethereal, and then everything returned to normal while the stellar sword diagram appeared before him. Xianxia gazed at the stellar sword diagram, and a smile curled up on the corners of his mouth. The stellar sword diagram was in his possession and the restrictions around Dark Hell continent was gone, so it was time to leave. Xianxia gazed at the sword spirit and said, "Let's go." She nodded in reply, and then she transformed into a ray of light that shot into Xianxia's chest. Doomsday City, the Sword Hall. Xianxia sat at the seat of the host and said, "I've decided to move the Sword Alliance's headquarters to Sword God Island." Previously, Blind Maiden hadn't allowed him to move the Sword Alliance there because the Black Dragon was in Sword God Ocean. Yet now, Xianxia had eaten the Black Dragon. Since there was no more danger in Sword God Ocean, he naturally intended to move the headquarters to the island. After all, it was more suitable for the Sword Alliance to develop there. The others naturally didn't reject Yang Ye's suggestion. Yang Ye's gaze descended upon Yun Banqing. "Banqing, I'll leave the move to you." Yun Banqing glanced at him and spoke softly, "All of you are leaving, right?" Yang Yi nodded, and then he glanced at the others. Tell your subordinates Yun Banqing will have full authority over the Sword Alliance on Dark Hell Continent. Her orders are my orders, and no one is to disobey them. Even though Yi Luyun had passed all her authority over to Yun Banqing, he still wanted to personally make it clear. Doing so would allow Yun Banqing's authority to be further ratified, and only then would her future orders be followed to the letter. The others hurriedly nodded when they heard him. Yang Yi had made his stand clear, and that represented that when Yang Yi and Yi Luyun weren't here, Yun Banqing would have the greatest authority on Dark Hell Continent. Yang Yi nodded. Everyone else besides Banqing can leave now. It didn't take long for only Yang Yi, Yun Banqing, and Yi Luyun to remain here. Yang Yi waved his right hand, and then 2 Voider Realm sword servants appeared before Yun Banqing. Keep these 2 puppets with you. Even though he'd given her authority, her strength was too weak. The experts of the Sword Alliance would naturally not dare to disobey her while he was on Dark Hell Continent. But if he led the others away from the continent, then there might be some who feigned compliance to her. He didn't want to see the Sword Alliance in a mess when he returned. Yun Banqing glanced at the puppets before her and said, "I'll manage the Sword Alliance well." Yang Yi nodded. Meanwhile, she added, "There's one more thing." Yang Yi said, "You're worried about the demon race, right?" Yun Banqing nodded. The demon race had returned to the Veiled region on the Demon Empress orders. But once Yang Yi and the others left, how would the Sword Alliance defend itself if the demon race attacked again? Yang Yi said, "Don't worry, I'll deal with it." She nodded. Since Yang Yi said that he would, then she naturally had no need to worry. She hesitated for a moment and said, "When will all of you return?" Yi Luyun gazed at Yang Yi as well because she wanted to know the answer too. Yang Yi shook his head. "I don't know, but don't worry, we will definitely come back. Our Sword Alliance's headquarters will be here. Regardless of how well or terribly it goes in the outside world, we'll still return." If he was all alone, he would definitely not develop any power. After all, it was so free to be just alone with his sword. However, he wasn't alone, and he had many to protect. So, he naturally had to continue developing the Sword Alliance. He pursued strength to protect the people dearest to him, and developing a power like the Sword Alliance was a type of strength as well. Yun Banqing nodded slightly. "So long as you do return." Yang Yi smiled. "Both of you go deal with the matters before our departure. I'll head to the Veiled region." Yi Luyun asked, "Should I ask the Lin clan's patriarch and the others to go with you? I alone am enough." As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that vanished outside the hall. Yi Luyun suddenly asked once Yang Yi left, "Do you regret it?" Yun Banqing replied, "Regret what?" Yi Luyun said, "You know what I mean." Yun Banqing remained silent for a short while, and then she said, "He has always been helping me, so I want to help him too. Isn't this a good opportunity to do that?" As soon as she finished speaking, she turned to look at Yi Luyun and continued, "He's quite a lazy fellow, so you'll be really busy by his side." Yi Luyun replied, "Actually, that's exactly why he's taking me with him." Both of them exchanged glances and smiled. Once he left Doomsday City, Yang Yi flew on his sword towards the Veiled region. The demon race was a really huge problem indeed, and he didn't dare to leave Dark Hell Continent without resolving it. But he didn't want to use force to resolve the problem. Of course, he didn't mind doing so if he had no other choice. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to arrive before the teleportation formation to the Veiled region, and then he stepped into it. Yang Yi frowned once he stepped into the circle of light, because the teleportation formation was actually sealed. He knew that the demon beasts had obeyed the Demon Empress orders and closed the teleportation formation into the Veiled region. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time before the Sword God's seal lit up on his forehead. After that, he stretched his right hand forward, and it didn't take long for 10 seemingly material intent swords to appear here. Yang Yi gazed at them for a short while, and then he vanished on the spot. He'd naturally left those intent swords behind as a defense against the demon race. Based on his current strength, those 10 intent swords could kill quite a few Voider Realm demon beasts. There were very few Voider Realm demon beasts, and coupled with the losses they'd sustained during the war with the human race, It could be said that the demon race couldn't afford to suffer any losses now. Even if it wanted to take revenge, it would be something extremely far in the future. Moreover, they were like a signal for him. If the demon race really did intend to leave the Veiled region, it would definitely have to destroy his intent swords. But once that happened, he would notice right away. But he felt that the demon race probably had no intention to take revenge right now. Now that it had lost the demon empress, it might fall into a state of internal strife. Xianxia had no choice but to admit that admired the demon empress. If Nie Wuming hadn't arrived abruptly, then the Sword Alliance would have been in a very worrying situation. Xianxia shook his head, restrained his thoughts, and then vanished into the sky, at the entrance of the Veiled region. He's gone. Are you sure? I am. Huff. Luckily. Notify the various patriarchs. Who do you think will become the new demon king? Who knows? I heard that none of the patriarchs are convinced of the other's strength. Alas, if only the demon empress was still alive, our demon race wouldn't have fallen into such a state. After he left, Xianxia went to Sword God Island. He hadn't forgotten that Sword God Island had some current residents. If he were to move the Sword Alliance to Sword God Island, then he had to resolve all issues with them, especially the 10,000-legged centipede. 2 hours later, Xianxia arrived on Sword God Island. Xianxia went straight to the centipede's home. Xianxia had just arrived there when the centipede flashed out from within the mountain, and he had an extremely solemn and fearful expression on his face when he saw Xianxia. He'd watched the battle between Xianxia's group and Jian Su's group. He knew that Xianxia wasn't someone he could fight anymore. Xianxia got straight to the point. My forces will be moving to Sword God Island. You don't have to leave, but you're prohibited from acting against them. The 10,000-legged centipede spoke in a low voice. What if I refuse? Xianxia replied, then you'll die right now. The centipede's eyelids twitched, and then he glanced at Xianxia and said, all right, I agree. Xianxia took a deep and long glance at the centipede. The centipede hurriedly said, human, since I've agreed, I will definitely do as I've said. So long as they don't look for trouble with me, then I would absolutely not look for trouble with them. Xianxia smiled. Calm down. I'm not going to kill you. I just have something to entrust you with. The centipede had quite a vigilant expression on his face. What is it? After all, he'd experienced how shameless Xianxia was. Xianxia said, I'm leaving Dark Hell Continent to deal with some things. I hope that you'll help me take care of them when they arrive on Sword God Island. Treat it as me owing you a favor, all right? This was actually why he'd allowed the centipede to remain on the island. The centipede was quite strong, and if he was willing to help take care of the Sword Alliance, then the Sword Alliance would have the strength to fight back even if the demon race attacked. The centipede replied, I might be leaving as well. Xianxia was shocked. You're leaving as well? The 10,000-legged centipede nodded. Since the restrictions are gone, I'm naturally going to leave as well. However, it won't be so soon. Don't worry. I'll help you take care of them until I leave. He was naturally willing to become friends with an expert like Xianxia. Thank you. Xianxia smiled, and then he cupped his fist to the 10,000-legged centipede and said, farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia turned around and vanished into the sky. The 10,000-legged centipede looked up into the sky and said, another Jian Wuji. Once he left Sword God Island, Xianxia immediately returned to the Sword Hall. Xianxia looked at Yi Liyun and said, is everyone here? Yi Liyun replied, they are waiting outside the hall. Xianxia nodded and said, let's. Suddenly, Xiangxia's expression changed drastically, and then the others watched with astonishment as Xianxia vanished on the spot. Xianxia seemed excited as he stood in his room, and his eyes were filled with wild joy and excitement. Why? Because the primordial pagoda was about to return to normal. At this moment, the tiny vortex was spinning at high speeds, and strands of aura were seeping out incessantly from it. Xianxia sat cross-legged in the room and waited in silence. He was quite excited and happy. Of course, he felt even more anticipation, because if nothing unexpected occurred, then he would be able to see Su Qingshi and the others right away. Qingshi, Xianxia, Bauer, Lei Lin, Little Yao, and his daughter Yang Nianxue. Around 6 hours passed just like that. Bang! A terrifying aura suddenly appeared throughout Doomsday City, shocking its residents. However, it didn't take long for the aura to suddenly vanish as if it had never appeared. Yang Ye's eyes closed slowly, and it didn't take long for him to vanish on the spot. Within the primordial pagoda, a woman was standing before Yang Yi. She wore a white dress, and she seemed pure like a goddess. It was Xianxia, of course. Yang Ye's eyes instantly became moist as he gazed at the beautiful and charming woman standing before him. He grinned, walked over to her, and then hugged her tightly. He embraced her tightly as if he was terribly afraid of losing her. A long time passed before Yang Yi spoke softly. "We're finally able to see each other again." 2 streams of tears seeped out of the corners of Xianxia's eyes when she heard him. After all, when the primordial pagoda was sealed off, she'd lost contact with Yang Yi as well, and no one knew how she'd overcome such days. It had been filled with anxiety and fear. Days and nights of anxiety and fear. Yang Yi had been in a hopeless situation at that time. Suddenly, a voice came from afar. "Hey, we're here as well." Xianxia hurriedly released Yang Yi when she heard the voice. Yang Yi looked up, and he saw a curvaceous woman in a red dress looking at him with discontent. "Xianxia." Yang Yi was about to speak when she ran over to him and kissed him. "Big Sister Bauer, what are they doing?" A young girl with pigtails was looking at Yang Yi and Xianxia with a curious gaze. She was around 8 or 9 years old, wore a small dress embroidered with flowers, and she had big eyes. She looked really like Yang Yi. "Swear, you can't see that." A woman around the age of 20 suddenly covered the young girl's eyes. After that, she pulled over another young girl on her right and said, "Lei Lin, you're not allowed to look too." "Big Sister Bauer, why can't I?" Lei Lin blanked while bewilderment filled her eyes. Bauer hurriedly covered Lei Lin's eyes. "You're still young, so you can't." Meanwhile, Xianxia had let go of Yang Yi and glared at him. "Tell us the truth. How many more women have you gotten in these years?" Xianxia gazed at Yang Yi as well. Yang Yi's face was absolutely dark. "Am I that lustful?" Xianxia replied with a question. "Are you not?" Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Suddenly, a clear and melodious voice came from afar. "Are you daddy?" Yang Yi's figure shuddered when he heard the voice, and then he looked up and saw a young girl with pigtails looking at him with a curious gaze. Yang Yi took a deep breath and went over to her. He carried her up in his arms and smiled. "Swear, say that again." Swear glanced at Xianxia, and Xianxia nodded slightly with a smile on her face. Swear gazed at Yang Yi again, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke softly, "Dad." Yang Yi's eyes became moist again. He naturally felt very guilty when it came to her, because he hadn't been by her side for long since she'd been born, especially once she'd entered the primordial pagoda. It had been sealed for around 5 or 6 years, so he hadn't been by her side at all during this time. As a father, he was absolutely not a good one. Suddenly, a slightly timid voice resounded, "Big brother." Yang Yi turned around and saw Lei Li looking at him. There was a slightly timid expression in her eyes, and she was slightly hesitant yet slightly happy as well. Lei Lin was still the same. She was still that small, and her body hadn't changed at all throughout the last few years. Yang Yi smiled as he gazed at her, and then waved at her. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to Yang Yi. Yang Yi carried her up with his other arm, and then he kissed both Lei Lin and Shuer on the cheek. In the beginning, Shuer was slightly distant, but it didn't take long for her to gradually get used to Yang Yi, and then she started to call him daddy in a very natural manner. After playing with Shuer and Lei Lin for a while, Yang Yi gazed at the young woman standing at the side. The young woman grinned. "Long time no see, little laborer, little laborer." Yang Yi chuckled. It was Bauer, of course. At this moment, she'd grown up into a graceful young woman, but she still seemed utterly mischievous. Besides Bauer, there was another woman there, and this woman once had quite a bit of enmity with him. It was Bairu, of course, and Bairu nodded slightly when she saw him look at her. and it could be considered as greeting him. Yang Yi nodded lightly to her as well. Even though there was enmity between them in the past, it had been resolved a long time ago. Yang Yi seemed to have thought of something, and he turned to look at Su Qingshi. Qingshi, I remember sending some members of the Ding clan in here. How are they? Su Qingshi replied. We left them in an unconscious state. Good. Yang Yi nodded. Besides those who were closest to him, he didn't want anyone else to know about the primordial pagoda, nor did he dare to let others find out about it. Yang Yi asked, Where's little Yao? He looked through the area but didn't see her. Su Qingshi spoke softly. She's in closed-door cultivation. She's charging into the quasi-emperor realm. The quasi-emperor realm. Yang Yi glanced at the others. He was quite surprised because Su Qingshi, Xianxia, and Anbairu were emperors. Even Bauer, who wasn't fond of cultivating, was a high-rank saint. As for Shuer, she was an exalt. As if she'd noticed Yang Ye's shock, Su Qingshi explained, The spirit energy here is very abundant. Moreover, it's unlike the spirit energy in the outside world. So we cultivate very quickly. So that's why. Yang Yi nodded. The spirit energy here was naturally very abundant. After all, there were so few people here yet so much spirit energy. Moreover, it wasn't ordinary spirit energy but violet energy. Even though the violet energy here was much inferior to primordial violet energy, it was countless times better than ordinary spirit energy. So, they naturally cultivated much faster within the primordial pagoda. Meanwhile, Su Qingshi said, Tell us about everything that has happened throughout these years. Xianxia hurriedly said, Right. Tell us. Don't even think about not mentioning how many women you've gotten in the last few years. Yang Yi chuckled, and then he started to summarize everything that had happened from Profounder Continent to the Radiant Dimension, and then to Dark Hell Continent. Of course, he didn't mention the dangers he faces because he didn't want them to feel worried. Even though Yang Yi had skipped the dangerous events, how could they not realize how dangerous it would have been? Su Qingshi remained silent, and she just held tightly to his hand. Yang Yi glanced at them and said, Let's not split up again. Meanwhile, Su Qingshi suddenly said, I want to stay on Dark Hell Continent. Xianxia said, Me too. And Bairu joined in, I want to stay as well. Yang Yi gazed at them while bewilderment filled his eyes. Why? Xianxia explained, The Sword Alliance is a power that you established, so you definitely need people to manage it. And Bairu and I have quite a bit of skill when it comes to management. As for Qingshi, she's your first wife. So her presence will be able to reassure the members of the Sword Alliance. After all, so long as she's here, the others would know that you'd definitely be back one day. In that way, then out of consideration for your power and influence, the residents of this continent would probably not dare to have any malicious thoughts. Yang Yi remained silent for a short while before he said, I don't want to be separated from all of you again. Su Qingshi shook her head slightly. We don't want to become your burdens. Even though they were emperors, as far as Yang Yi was concerned, emperors were of no help to him in battle. If they stayed with him, they would only be burdens to him. But if they stayed on Dark Hell Continent, then they would be able to help him. Yang Yi was still quite hesitant, even though he knew that staying behind was a very good choice for them. After all, it would be very difficult for Yun Banqing to manage the Sword Alliance on her own. Even Yi Luyun, who was so capable of management, found it almost impossible to completely manage the Sword Alliance, let alone Yun Banqing. So, if Su Qingshi and the others stayed, it would be very beneficial to the Sword Alliance. However, he really didn't want to be separated from them when they'd just been reunited, especially Yang Nianxue. Su Qingshi seemed to know what he was thinking and spoke softly. We don't want to be separated as well, but we have a stronger desire to help you. Yang Yi glanced at them and nodded. Fine. When Yang Yi brought Su Qingshi and the others to the Sword Alliance, countless people started to discuss it animatedly. Even Yi Luyun and Yun Banqing were astounded. After all, even they had never met Su Qingshi and the others. They are my wives. As soon as Yang Yi introduced them, the entire Sword Alliance was filled with clamorous noise. Even though they were shocked and bewildered, it didn't take long for them to accept Su Qingshi and the others. Besides that, Yang Yi delayed his trip because of them, and he stayed with them for around 10 days before he led the others out of Dark Hell Continent on the Void Cloud Shuttle. Meanwhile, Schwer looked up at the Void Cloud Shuttle that had transformed into a black in the sky and asked, "Mom, will Dad come back?" Su Qingshi rubbed Schwer's head gently and smiled. "He definitely will, because both of us are here, so this is his home." On the Void Cloud Shuttle, Yang Yi sat cross-legged in his room. At this moment, his mind was immersed into the Primordial Pagoda. The Primordial Pagoda hadn't just recovered. Even the third level had been opened. Yang Yi issued a command in his heart and arrived at a gray and hazy world. There was a door not too far ahead from him, and it was open. Yang Yi remained silent on the spot for an instant, and then he walked in. How could this be possible? Yang Ye's surprised and bewildered voice resounded once he walked through the door. After he entered through the door, he arrived at a room. The room wasn't huge. It was less than 300 m in both length and width, and there was nothing in it. It was completely empty. Yang Ye's eyes were filled with bewilderment. Suddenly, the sword spirit appeared by his side. She glanced at the surroundings and frowned slightly. Something is off. Yang Yi sensed the surroundings carefully and nodded. Indeed, even though they felt that something was slightly off, they couldn't put a finger on it. Just like that, a long time passed before the sword spirit's pupils suddenly constricted. "I've got it." Yang Yi gazed at her. "What is it?" She turned to look at him. "Go out and come back in." Even though he didn't know why she asked him to do that, Yang Yi had done as she'd said. He'd left the room and walked back in, and then his brows were pressed tightly together, because he hadn't noticed anything. But it didn't take long for his pupils to constrict slightly. How could this be possible? He noticed that the time within the room was different from the time outside it. The sword spirit nodded while shock filled her eyes. It's truly inconceivable that such a divine treasure actually exists in this world. Turning time backwards. What amazing ability! Yang Yi was puzzled. Turning time back? She explained. You should be aware that true voiders possess the laws of time. They are able to slow down their opponents for a certain period while their own speed remains the same. But in this place, the space here is capable of making time flow backwards. To explain it in simpler terms, if you cultivate here for 10 years, only a year would have passed in the outside world. Yang Ye's expression instantly changed. 10 years there was equivalent to a year outside. It was simply insane. Meanwhile, the sword spirit added, that old man in Taoist robes might have attained a level that we can't imagine. Yang Yi nodded. He knew the old man was very strong, extremely strong. After all, just a clone of the old man had killed Jian Wuji. How terrifying was that? However, he didn't know exactly how strong the old man was. Meanwhile, the sword spirit shook her head and said, There's no need to think too much about it. It's not impossible for you to attain such a cultivation in the future. Now that you have this room, your cultivation will be much swifter and you'll attain the Voider realm soon. Attain it as soon as possible because the Emperor realm is far insufficient for you. Of course. Yang Yi nodded. Even though Voiders were no threat to him now, Voiders weren't the only experts in this world. There were semi-deities and even deities. Moreover, there were even stronger existences above the deity realm. If he didn't possess formidable strength, then what would he do if he had to face an expert like Jiansu or Blind Maiden one day? He had to grow stronger. He had to grow ceaselessly stronger. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and said, Let's go. There was no rush to cultivate immediately. In any case, the room was within him so he could enter it at any time. The sword spirit nodded and transformed into a ray of light that entered Yang Ye's body. Once he left the room, Yang Yi didn't return to reality. He went to the Pavilion of Alchemy on the second level. There was a young girl lying there. It was Xiaoqi who was still unconscious. He felt a huge amount of guilt towards her, because she'd fallen unconscious while trying to save him. Besides allowing her to just wake up on her own, the only other way to wake her up was to refine a suitable medicinal pill. However, he hadn't had any time to study the Tao of Alchemy, so Xiaoqi had been unconscious until now. Yang Yi rubbed her head gently and said, Once I'm done with the matters in the radiant dimension, I'll focus on alchemy and wake you up. I guarantee it won't take more than a year. As soon as he finished speaking, he started walking towards the furnace. At the moment Yang Yi turned around, Xiaoqi's finger had moved slightly. At the same time, a thread of blue light suddenly appeared on her forehead. But it only took a moment for it to vanish. Yang Yi hadn't noticed all of that. He'd arrived before the furnace, and there was a flame blazing within it. Yang Ye's face gradually grew solemn as he gazed at it. Mo Xiaoling's flames were very strong and terrifying, but the divine flame before him was absolutely stronger. Mo Xiaoling's flames felt very dangerous to him, but the divine flame didn't just feel dangerous. He actually felt terrified while standing before it. After all, even blind maiden Jian Su and the demonic dragon hadn't made him feel like that. He possessed a body at the epic realm, but he would definitely be instantly transformed into ashes if he were to jump into the furnace. That was something he believed with absolute certainty. Could he control it? This wasn't a thought that he'd only had now. He'd had such a thought from the moment he laid eyes on it. However, at that time he'd immediately rejected the thought once it appeared in his mind. After all, his strength was too weak, so it was best to not hold such thoughts. Yet now he was an emperor, and his strength was much greater than before. If he could control it, then his strength would definitely rise tremendously, because even blind maiden would probably dare not go head-on against the divine flame. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before stretching his hand forward towards it. Suddenly, the sword spirit appeared by his side and shook her head. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time before he nodded. It was obviously impossible for him to subdue the divine flame with his current strength. If he tried to force it, then it might backfire. Even though it was quite a pity, his life was more important. Right when Yang Yi and the sword spirit had turned around and started walking away, a voice suddenly resounded, "Come again when you've accessed the 4th level." Yang Yi and the sword spirit's bodies trembled, and then they exchanged glances. Both their eyes were filled with shock. A moment of silence ensued as they gazed at the divine flame, because the voice had come from within the furnace. Yang Yi gulped and asked, You can speak." However, the divine flame didn't answer him. Yang Yi refused to give up and repeated the question a few more times, but it didn't answer him. Yang Yi gazed at the sword spirit, and the latter shook her head. "Come back when you've accessed the 4th level." Yang Yi nodded. He glanced at the divine flame, and then he left the pavilion of alchemy. Outside the pavilion, Yang Yi was puzzled. That fellow can clearly speak, yet why won't he answer me? The sword spirit glanced at Yang Yi and said, "Do you really want to know?" Yang Yi replied, "Of course." She explained, "There's only one explanation. You're too weak right now, so he feels that you're not qualified to speak with him." As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished on the spot. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Even she has started to be playful. Yang Yi shook his head and returned to the void cloud shuttle. Yang Yi was standing at the bow while Yi Luyun was by his side. At this moment, the void cloud shuttle had left Dark Hell Continent and was in space. Endless stars filled their fields of vision. There were shooting stars flashing through the distance from time to time and vanished from their fields of vision. So space is so beautiful. Yi Luyun gazed at the stars that covered the sky and couldn't help but exclaim with admiration. Indeed, Yang Yi nodded. It was the first time that he was in space. Needless to say, a person would notice how tiny he or she is when standing amidst the endless starry sky. Humans were like specks of dust when compared to the boundless universe. Of course, a universe was very tiny to some. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time before he said, "How many people came with us?" Yi Luyun pondered deeply for a moment and said, "A total of 11 voiders. There were 12, but Senior Jian Su vanished, so only 11 remain. There are 4 from our Sword Alliance, and they are Senior Jian Ji, Chen Lankong, Shui Linlang, and Senior He Yuan. As for emperors, a total of 3,000 came. Our Sword Alliance and the Slayer Pavilion have a total of around 1,000. The rest are from the 3 sects and 3 cities." Yi Luyun hesitated briefly at this point and asked, "Are we going to fight someone?" "I'm going to get some people." Yang Yi gazed at the dense expanse of stars and said, "I hope there's no need to fight." He didn't want to waste time in the radiant dimension because Lady was still waiting for him. Yi Luyun nodded and said, "The 3 cities and 3 sects are following us because of your power and influence. They dare not refuse you, but it won't last for long. What exactly do you plan to do with them?" "I don't want to force them to join the Sword Alliance," replied Yang Yi. Even though he could do that and had the ability to do so, it would bury a seed of disaster for the Sword Alliance. "I understand what you mean," she said. "I have a way." Yang Yi replied, "Go on." She explained, "Benefits. Use benefits to tie them to us and make them take the initiative to stay with the Sword Alliance." Yang Yi said, "Continue." She smiled. "Just Dark Hell Continent is too small for our Sword Alliance, right?" Yang Yi gazed at her for a long time and said, "Luyun, you have great aspirations, and you've thought very far ahead." She said, "Many powers control more than one world. Our Sword Alliance is growing stronger and stronger, so it naturally can't just stand still. We have to obtain even more worlds. Once we obtain those worlds, we can share a little of the benefits to the 3 cities and 3 sections. We can allow them to send their forces to that world to establish a power of their own in that world. In that way, they'll naturally follow close behind our Sword Alliance. At that time, they wouldn't leave even if you asked them to." Yang Yi glanced at her and said, "Luyun, have you already started making arrangements for the Sword Alliance's future development and expansion?" Yi Luyun nodded. "There are many things that have to be planned in advance." Yang Yi smiled. "I'm lucky to gain your help." Yi Luyun smiled and spoke seriously. "Actually, I like doing this. You know, when I was a mercenary in the past, all of us were like ants in the eyes of emperors and voiders. Whenever we encountered the disciples of those sects or cities, or even if we encountered emperors, we would hide as far away as we could, because we were absolutely afraid of offending them. Yet now, while I'm just an emperor, even voiders dare not be disrespectful to me." As she spoke, she stretched her hand forward in Yang Ye's direction, and then she slowly clenched it tightly. "I've become addicted to the feeling of possessing power and authority." Yang Yi gazed at her for a few breaths of time before he said, "Since you've become addicted to it, then make it grow larger and larger." Yi Luyun smiled. "Of course." Yang Yi smiled, and then he turned to look towards the distance. "We've arrived." There was a huge teleportation formation in the distance. Needless to say, it was the stellar teleportation formation that Blind Maiden had told him about. The Void Cloud shuttle sped up under Yang Ye's orders and entered the teleportation formation. As soon as it did, a mysterious force enveloped them, and then a spatial passageway that seemed as if it was made of stars appeared before them. It didn't take long for a ray of dazzling starlight to erupt from the passageway, and then it enveloped them before the scene before their eyes started to blur. It was because they were moving too swiftly. After an unknown amount of time passed, Yang Yi opened his eyes slowly. At this moment, he was on a huge stone platform that stretched out for around 3 kilometers in all directions. A huge stellar teleportation formation was in the air above the stone platform, and they'd emerged from that exact formation. There were countless similar stone platforms all around them. Yang Yi took a quick glance and noticed that there were at least a few tens of thousands of them. Meanwhile, Yi Luyun suddenly said, "Look up!" Yang Yi looked up and saw a dense expanse of stars covering the sky above them. It wasn't just there. Even their surroundings were filled with stars. But those stars were quite far away from them. "No wonder it's called Stellar City." Yi Luyun continued, "This isn't a star at all. It's a city that was built in space." Yang Yi nodded while a trace of seriousness could be seen in his eyes. Blind Maiden had said that Stellar City was created by a clan in the large world. He didn't have an idea of what such a clan was like, but now that he'd seen the city, he knew that it was definitely extremely terrifying. After all, was it not terrifying to be able to build a city in outer space? In any case, he couldn't accomplish that. Suddenly, the space before them rippled, And it didn't take long for a man in black armor to appear before Xianxia's group. The man glanced indifferently at them and said, "The teleportation fees are 500 divine crystals." Divine crystals? Xiangxia was slightly stunned. He only knew energy stones and violet crystals. He'd never heard of divine crystals. The man glanced at Xiangxia and asked, "Is it your first time here?" Xiangxia nodded. The man said, "One divine crystal is equivalent to 100 violet crystals, so you can pay with 50,000 violet crystals as well." 50,000 violet crystals. Yi Luyun and the others felt shocked. After all, it wasn't a small number. Even though it wasn't a huge amount to the Sword Alliance, they felt that it was quite expensive just for a single teleportation. Yi Luyun and the others weren't the only ones to feel shocked. Even Xiangxia was quite surprised. "Isn't that a little too much?" Meanwhile, the man said, "Only my Situ clan is capable of providing stellar teleportation in this universe. A monopoly." Xiangxia had immediately thought of this when he heard the man. No wonder it's so expensive. So only they can accomplish this. Xiangxia didn't hesitate to flick a spatial ring over. He could afford to pay 50,000 violet crystals. After all, he had almost 1.3 million violet crystals right now. All of them had been created by Snowy. Xiangxia couldn't help but slowly clench his fists when he thought of Snowy. "Damn you! Mo Shaoling." A wisp of ghastly killing intent flashed through Xiangxia's eyes. He'd been careless that day. He hadn't expected Mo Shaoling to summon an expert from her clan to capture Zir and Snowy. If he knew that would happen, he would have stopped at nothing to kill Mop Shaoling before that happened. The man glanced at the spatial ring and nodded, and he was about to leave when Yi Luyun suddenly spoke. "Please wait a moment." The man stopped and gazed at her. She flicked a spatial ring over to the man. The man glanced at it, and he noticed 10,000 violet crystals within it. 10,000 violet crystals were equivalent to 100 divine crystals, and that was equivalent to a month of his wages. So, he didn't hesitate to take it, and then he gazed at Yi Luyun. "I'm Li Shi, and I'm in charge of this teleportation formation." Yi Luyun smiled when she saw him take the spatial ring, and she said, "Brother Li, we've new here, and we don't know much. Please enlighten us." Li Shi asked, "What do you want to know?" Yi Luyun pondered deeply for a moment before she said, "Why don't you tell us what we should know?" Li Shi glanced at Yi Luyun and said, "This is the Shi clan's territory. Even though it's at the large world, don't offend the Shi clan here. Besides that, while it's the Shi clan's territory, the forces of many other powers from the large world are here as well. Because this is the interchange between all the medium and small worlds. In short, the situation here is very complicated, so it's best to act cautiously." Yi Luyun nodded slightly and said, "We want to head to the radiant dimension. Do we teleport there from here?" Li Shi shook his head and answered her. "The teleportation formations here are one way. If you want to travel to other worlds, you have to head to the teleportation platform at the north of the city. There are teleportation formations to countless worlds there. So long as you pay the fees and provide the name or coordinates of your destination, you'll be teleported there. However, you can't teleport to other worlds right now." Xiangxia was puzzled. "Why?" Li Shi replied, "Not long ago, someone seemed to have drawn upon the energy of countless stars, and it affected our teleportation formations. They are being repaired right now, but it probably won't take long." Drew upon the energy of countless stars? The corners of Xiangxia's mouth twitched. "Am I the cause?" Meanwhile, Li Shi said, "You can rest in Divine Sky Pavilion within the city. Right, the Azure Cloud Merchant Group is holding an auction tonight. It's the biggest and best merchant group in the city, and all the items in their previous auctions have been pretty good. Supposedly, there are even treasures above the Void rank, the Origin rank, being auctioned off this time. If you have enough funds, you can try to bid for the Origin rank treasures." Yi Luyun suddenly asked, "Does Azure Cloud Merchant Group belong to the Shi clan?" Li Shi shook his head. "No. Anyone can open stores in the city by paying rental to the Shi clan. Right, even though I don't know which world Azure Cloud Merchant Group is from, they are quite strong. So you absolutely shouldn't think about targeting them. Actually, I should say that anyone capable of opening a store in this city is strong. Understood. Yiluyun nodded slightly, and then she fell into deep thought. No one knew what she was thinking. Li Shi glanced at them and said, "If there's nothing else that you need, then I'll be leaving now." Yang Yi smiled. "Thank you. It was my duty." As soon as he finished speaking, he cupped his fist to Yang Yi and the others, and then he vanished on the spot. Yang Yi turned to look at Yiluyun, and he asked, "What are you thinking about now?" Yiluyun replied, "This is the place where all worlds meet. In other words, this place is linked to countless worlds. So we must establish ourselves here. Of course, it's not for the sake of earning violet crystals, and it's for the sake of possessing information related to countless worlds at all times." Yang Yi nodded. "That's a very good idea. Do it and feel free to tell me if you need anything or encounter any problems." Yiluyun nodded. "There's no rush now. I'll make arrangements once I gain an understanding of this place. Come, let's go to that Divine Sky Pavilion which he told us about." It didn't take long for them to arrive before Divine Sky Pavilion. Yang Yi was quite wealthy and booked an entire floor. In his room, Yang Yi entered the third level of the primordial pagoda and started cultivating. Only a day would pass in the outside world while he cultivated for 10 days in there. With such a heaven-defying room to cultivate in, Yang Yi naturally had to cultivate diligently and not waste even a breath of time. Actually, he anticipated the fourth level even more. The primordial pagoda had 9 levels, and every single one of them had given him extremely pleasant surprises. Especially the third level. It was an absolutely heaven-defying tool for cultivating. If just the third level was so heaven-defying, then what about the fourth? Moreover, the divine flame had told him to access the fourth level before going to see it. If he could gain control over the divine flame. Just thinking about it made Yang Yi quite excited. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts, focused, and started to concentrate on cultivating. 6 hours later, Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes and returned to the outside world. Yang Yi said, "Come in." The door was pushed open and Yiluyun walked in. She asked, "Are you interested in taking a look at that auction?" Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Let's go have a look." Stellar City was exceptionally gorgeous at night. Stars would fill one's field of vision upon looking up, especially these stars in space. They seemed like they were just hanging above them and were within reach. Yang Yi gazed at the stars that covered the sky above them and said, "Actually, it's really not bad to live such a peaceful life with someone you love." Yiluyun glanced at him and said, "From the moment we became cultivators, it meant that we have to fight both man and the heavens. The path of cultivation is endless. That represents that we might have to fight others and the heavens forever. It can't be helped because you'll die if you refuse to fight." Yang Yi smiled. "I was just expressing my feelings." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi sped up. Yiluyun glanced at him and hurried off after him. It didn't take long for them to arrive at Azure Cloud Merchant Group. They paid 10 divine crystals to enter the auction house. But the auction had already begun. Yang Yi and Yiluyun found an empty room. Every single room was very far away from each other, and the distance between them was around 30 m. Moreover, they were protected by formations. Once they entered the room, they were completely isolated from the outside world, and the divine sense of others couldn't enter at all. There was a huge stone platform at the center of the auction house, and there was a woman in a green dress standing on it. The woman was beautiful, and she had a warm smile on her face. She glanced at the surroundings and said, "The next item to be auctioned is a slave. Let's skip the introductions and take a look at the goods first." She clapped lightly while she spoke. It didn't take long for the teleportation on her right to light up abruptly, and then a figure appeared on the stone platform. Yang Yi suddenly stood up when he saw that person, and his eyes were filled with disbelief.